Welcome, everybody, to the Frontline Podcast. This is the official KARDS Podcast, and I am joined once again by Elin. You had a month off. We let you off the hook to discuss the Brothers in Arms expansion, but you're back, and we are very excited to have you back because we got a heck of a topic here this week.
We do. We're bringing back Gummi, our Chief Creative Officer. He is also someone that I like to call the mastermind of KARDS. He is the one that came up with the idea. He's the one that started this whole thing and really has his fingers in every different little facet of the game. So we're so excited to welcome him here today. And we're going to be talking about the artwork of KARDS.
And not just the artwork of KARDS, right, Gummi? Like the progression from the very beginning of the artwork to what we have today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me back here in the podcast. It's been a while. This is a topic I'm super interested in, and I could go on forever. So you will have to, stop me when I keep rambling on. But I mean, the artwork in KARDS is really one of the things that I am the most proud of with the game. I think we really have done a good job there. But it wasn't always so. I mean, we weren't really sure back in the days when we were starting. Then when the idea was just to create a World War II card game, we didn't really at first know how it would look and so on. The whole game, of course, but I think in this podcast we're just going to be talking mostly about the card artwork itself.
Mostly, but as Mark flashes some of these up on the screen, I may poke at a few little nuggets or Easter eggs that we see on some of the artwork, because I think there's some super interesting little pieces there that we can delve into as well. So do we, I guess, want to start from the very beginning, Gummi?
Yeah, so I mean, when the idea was born, that was back in 2014, even before, the company was founded or anything. Then the first prototypes were extremely simple, or we had to start somewhere, and post-it notes are often a very good beginning of a good project, even for the artwork. So the first playable versions of the game or the prototypes were post-it notes glued onto EVE Online card game cards, which someone might be familiar with. I was, of course, at the time working at CCP, the developers of EVE Online, and they made this card game back in the days, which didn't end up being very successful, but was pretty cool. But the cards came into good use as to glue the post-it notes on.
So there was just a pile of them sitting around. You grabbed a stack and just started slapping post-it notes on top.
And just the artwork was like stick figures, extremely simple and quite fun to look at in hindsight.
That was going to be a question I wanted to ask you, because as you're developing this game and you're putting it together and you're building it out, you don't need to have artwork on the cards, right? Like the stick figures aren't necessary at all. So what was the first desire to say, like, hey, I want to draw this infantry with what looks like a very large rifle of some sort? Like what kind of drove you to decide, I want to put artwork on these because this is fun?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, yeah, I guess it's, I'm a designer, by heart, and visuals are a very important thing for me. So I kind of immediately at least wanted to have the stick figures, just as a simple kind of visual language to tell the cards from each other, what the unit types and so on, to distinguish between them. But I didn't spend a lot of time on drawing these, so it was a process. And we actually in the beginning I had endless stacks of these post-it notes. You can see on these also, it's actually quite interesting that you have the unit types, and and the attack and defense, of international icons, markers. But then you have some other things there that you don't have in the game anymore, like the units cost 1 oil and plus 2 something else, and you have their Gibraltar, which is a location that provided you with resources, food and stuff, and some bonuses. These were designs that didn't end up in the game.
I was going to say that really shows how much the game has changed as well from some of the initial thoughts, right? Because you had, like you're saying, locations that sort of provided you with resources. And then, okay, so you would play Gibraltar, that gives you food. You need food to be able to play your infantry. So you're sort of ramping up in a different way, not the traditional, kind of system that you have now where you just gain an additional, resource every turn.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I mentioned in earlier podcasts and in the bunker and so on, when we've been talking about the game was quite much more complicated to begin with, and then we kind of chopped off various parts of it to streamline it and making it more accessible and flow better. And you can see also, for example, if you go to the images where you have the first ones with photographs, black and white photographs. You have the HMS Illustrious, which is funnily a very nice card in the game still, but works a bit differently. But there you can see on the card design there that playing that card costs 3 barrels of oil and some units of steel and stuff like that. But here you can see also the completely different design, quite much more designed than the post-it notes, of course, but very different from what it is today.
And when you were looking for, let's say, images for this, because you were still very much, I guess, in the development phase of it, you were just sort of slapping pictures on that you found online. There was not much thought into it. It was more just to get something out there, or was there more to it than that?
Yeah, we were also just experimenting with trying out like these black and white photographs, and this was in the very early stages. Also keep in mind that we hadn't even decided that this was going to be a computer game. It could have ended up as a physical card game as well, and then Hearthstone came out, and then we kind of thought to ourselves, well, it seems like the digital version is something more interesting. But I mean, we were actually thinking about using the photographs. That would have completely changed the kind of feeling in the game, and it would have been much more like historically maybe accurate and things like that, and more realistic in some way. You can see here other examples like the field hospital. This is a completely different vibe. But early on, we also started looking at some, picking some artwork from posters, from actual war posters, and immediately we kind of felt that was a really cool feeling. That gave really varied and interesting artwork on many of those. So we started using them in mixture with the photographs.
Especially because a lot of the World War II, I feel like posters were so iconic. Like you see them and you immediately recognize where they're from. And you get, like you said, it's a very different feeling than being the ultra realistic photographs of everything as you kind of build the game out.
And so what the artwork from the posters does as well is it kind of, and we felt we wanted to go more into the kind of romantic feeling from World War II than the actual realistic World War II. Yeah.
When you talk about sort of romanticizing a little bit, and I want to be careful of saying romanticizing about war, but the aspect as well of you're making a card game, you want to appeal to a variety of audiences. So being too realistic can also be a little bit too maybe graphic at
Yeah.
some points, and coming up with like the posters and the images and the artwork can be a little bit lighter. And again, I don't want to go too light. This isn't Hearthstone with wizards and all kinds of funky colors, but it gives it a little bit more lightness to it than if you're graphic and really intense when it comes to the nitty gritty of the war itself.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think and from my perspective, I've always been super interested in the history of World War II and all that. So for me, the photographs had definitely a certain charm to them. And I know that for historical, buffs and guys really people interested in World War II and that history would have maybe liked the photographs and the vibe that they give, but we kind of felt we want to be more accessible to bigger groups of players, and maybe a little bit remove ourselves from the actual all these horrors of the actual war. And yeah, like that's why I often use the term the romanticized version of World War II, where we skip all the politics and all the death and destruction as such.
I have a question as you go back to, we're looking at the HMS Illustrious, we're looking at the field hospital as cards. And obviously you're still, working through kind of developing the game and fine tuning what resources are going to be in it and all that kind of stuff. So how do you develop sort of in parallel the game itself, as well as, okay, we're changing this in the game, how are we going to adjust the card? Is it something that happens at the same time? Is it something that happens, hey, we changed the bit of the rules, so now the card design has to change? Or as you're using the cards, you realize like, I don't like this that much, or I don't like the look of it, or I want to move, these items around. Kind of how does that play out hand in hand?
Yeah, that's a good question. In this case, I think it's it was quite organic, so it was a bit like you describe. The game design changes a little bit there, so the graphic design also changes. And then when I was working alone, or we were very few at the beginning on the project and just mocking up different versions and testing different prototypes. I was, of course, I have a large network of friends and former co-workers in the gaming industry, so I could be bouncing off ideas and design tests of a lot of people and getting feedback and so on. And definitely like for example with the artwork versus black and white photographs, that was very strong feedback that I got early on. Was like, it would be way better, and we could make the game much more, commercial and appealing to more people if we just used the artwork. And so then we started looking into that, if that was even possible, because we didn't really know how much artwork was out there that we could use, because for a card game you need so large amounts of images for all the cards. And if you wanted to produce all of that, then we would have had to start by hiring 100 artists and things like that. So we wanted to explore this if we could find the artwork and get licenses to use it, and yeah, so that led us down that way.
As you were speaking of, artwork as well versus, let's say, photographs, you mentioned, especially from the photograph perspective, you've got a lot of very big, World War II enthusiasts who would love the images. Do you ever get, or did you ever become worried at that point as well that like, hey, we might want to create a card and we might not have the proper image for it, and those enthusiasts might look at it and go, wait a second, that's not accurate, or that's not right? And do you feel that with artwork you get a little bit more creative freedom sometimes if things aren't, exactly perfect?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, but still, with the artwork, we also try to be fairly accurate with the the right models and types of the units. We don't always get it right, of course, but our players are usually quick to point that out, so we can correct our mistakes. But yes, definitely. But still, with the photographs, the good thing with the photographs, and why we were opting for those to begin with, is that they are all public domain, um, and there is a lot of photographs available from the war. Actually, much more than the artwork, high quality artwork. But when we started digging into it, there was actually also a lot of artwork out there. And fortunately, the artists or the rights holders for a lot of that stuff were willing to work with us.
Awesome. And Elin, I know I've been monopolizing the conversation here a little bit, but I think it's interesting that Gummi brought up, hey, if we release something that's not exactly right, somebody's going to let us know. And I feel like you being on the community side probably get a message or two every expansion going, hey, that's not what that looks like, or that's not what that should be, or I disagree.
Sure. That's definitely something that we've noticed, and something that's been pointed out as well. Sometimes if there's some inaccuracies, for example, in the historical information, if that doesn't match with the unit, with the picture of the unit, or or the actual historical image that we're using isn't correct, players are incredibly quick to point that out and let us know. And there's definitely been times that the team needs to kind of, okay, so let's make some adjustments here. This isn't quite the right one, which is really fantastic.
Well, it goes to show the type of community you've cultivated as well, where, you do have those, I imagine, card game enthusiasts, and you have those World War II enthusiasts, and you have a great big mix of different folks who all approach the game from a different perspective.
Absolutely. It's a phenomenal community, and I think we're so lucky to have such a wide range of players that are coming into it with totally different viewpoints. And those history buffs, they really make sure that that Cards is as historically accurate as it can possibly get.
So Gummi, as I'm scrolling through these images you provided, I guess at a certain point you did realize, hey, this is going to be a digital card game. This isn't necessarily going to be something played on a tabletop. So there was the additional resources required to create, an actual board for players to interact with. So how did that sort of come to be, as we have, I guess, one of the initial ones here to share?
Yeah, I mean, we very early on we decided it would be a digital game. But then we start thinking, how would that look? How would the board look and stuff? And we tried tons of versions, some of which you can see here, where you can see different board backgrounds and the user interface completely different from what it is today, and the boards themselves and the card designs. Yeah, I mean, that was like the process I was describing. I mean, we were bouncing this off of a lot of people and testing, and some of the screenshots or the screens you see here of the board are actually playable versions. Like the first mobile version is there. Soon, when we in the process, I got very fond of the idea that the game should actually feel like you were sitting at the table playing actual cards, more than having this, computer game feeling. And after we kind of came to that conclusion, and that became kind of a design principle, we started to focus a lot more on the cards. The cards, the artwork became bigger on the cards, and the UI became more and more minimalistic and more like just an overlay, just to help you to understand what's going on in the game. But the feeling should be that you're actually sitting at the table playing cards. So that was kind of the you see in some of these earlier boards, the UI is much more, takes bigger part of the screen and is more stylized than it is today in the battle scene.
And to your point, today, it sort of looks like, two soldiers sit down at a table, one takes their helmet off, one puts their lighter on the table, and then they just, pull out their cards and get after it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the kind of the reference we've often used is that they are, sitting in some bunker or in some at some trenches or something, and just playing a game there.
So as we continue to go through some of these images, I guess you sort of have I guess, final versions of some of these cards with photographs. So like we see the Enigma machine, 5th Brigade, things like that. Is this sort of all right, this feels about right, but now we're going to make that switch from photographs to the artwork?
Yeah, I mean there you can see that some of the the designs of the cards are starting to look more familiar, like with the headers, with the national colors and the national markers, and the kind of the image is starting to take the biggest part of the card. So those designs are getting closer, but then you can see with the blitzkrieg and the carpet bombing there in the next examples, there we are getting pretty close to what we know from the game later on, and it's quite funny that these cards also actually function pretty much the same still.
Yeah, some small
Then there
tweaks,
are all
but
kinds of things, like with the Blitzkrieg card there, you see the marker on the helmet there. Of course, this is something you wouldn't want to have in a game that is, accessible to all ages and so on. So we modified things like that here and there.
just out of curiosity, whenever you're talking about modifying artwork, you said the artists and the rights holders and things like that were happy to work with you. Did you ever get any pushback around, hey, this is my original art, please don't make modifications to it, and you just decided maybe we won't use this in the game? Or was everybody very open to, keeping it open to the general public?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, like in this case, of course, this is from poster stuff. Some German propaganda posters. So those are public domain, and we can fiddle around with those like we want. But with the artwork that we get directly from artists, or we have commissioned, or so on, then it is very clear in the contracts that we make from the start that we reserve the right to modify the artwork in a little bit. In some cases, artists have been opposed to this, and then we have then we just have to respect that, and then we just don't use particular images that don't fit, or don't modify them in those cases.
So you mentioned, going ahead and finding artwork in different places because you were actually surprised at how much existed. So where did you get some of the inspiration from, or where did you find some of the resources?
Yeah, like I said in the beginning, we weren't really sure what was out there and what we could use. We started out with posters because they were easy to find, and then when we kind of the signal was strong that this was the way to go, then we really started looking, and then we started to find some really cool stuff, and great sources of artwork for the game. And if I just list up the main ones, the posters are big. A little bit different for the different nations. So there's a lot of posters we can use for USA and Britain. The Soviets did a lot of posters as well and stuff. The Germans, of course, did as well, but they're a little bit more difficult to, the Nazi posters are a little bit sensitive. So we're not using that much of those. But then we started. I started soon realizing when I was just googling around that there is a whole field of artists working in like aviation art and historical artists doing military artwork and stuff like that. And that was much bigger scene in the art world than I had known previously. So we have a lot of really talented, good artists who are painting, these beautiful Spitfires and Mustangs and all that. Then, of course, and my favorite type of art, which I will be talking about here, is the artwork on the box art from like model kits from the 70s, 80s, from Matchbox and Airfix and stuff like that, and the plastic soldier kits and all that stuff. Some of that artwork was done by real masters in their trade, great illustrators, and the great thing there also is, and what was a big inspiration for me was that I remember playing with some of these kits myself when I was a kid. Like some of these on the screen there, like the German, half truck and motorcycle and stuff. I had this exact kit, and I played a lot with it. And it was actually one of the things that, at a very young age, got me interested in World War II and the history there.
It's so interesting that it comes back around full circle.
Absolutely, yeah. But at that point, I just knew of this artwork, but I had no idea of how to figure out, whether we could use it or not. And to begin with, I wasn't that optimistic. But then we started digging around, and I found out that some of these, or many of these artists are still with us, even if they are quite elderly, some of them, and just started, finding their contact info somehow and just sending them emails. And yeah, surprisingly, a little bit surprisingly for us, they were most of them really interested in working with us. When we had explained how we would use it and that what the context was. So, for example, these images there by the great master Roy Huxley, who did a lot of the Matchbox artwork. I was really, really happy when we signed that deal and got him on board, because that was a good sale or a good pitch, when we were talking to a lot of other artists, that you could say, I could say, that we already have on board, this, legend in the field.
Was that part of it as well? You even, you had alluded to the aviation kind of community doing some of that artwork that, okay, well, once I get one artist in that space, they sort of know each other, they can talk to each other, they can vouch for us, things like that. So was it kind of getting into a community and then leveraging some of your connections there to help further build this out?
Absolutely. My emails when I was reaching out originally always were like, yeah, we are interested in whether we can get a license to use some of your great art. We already have artwork from this and this and this guy, and that I think really helped to kind of validate that we had a really a real product with real quality stuff already in there. That helps, of course, the artist to kind of make the decision.
Absolutely. And Elin, I want to touch on something community related, because I think Gummi brought up a great point where, some of these model kits that, he played with as a child now come back around. And, I've had conversations, for example, with Bubbles, who is trying to go and hunt down some of these posters places. And he's got, a nice collection that he's putting together. Have you heard much of that from the community, where maybe they haven't necessarily been playing with the model kits, but, have seen posters around or have, sort of found some of the pieces of that original artwork?
Absolutely. It's always incredibly exciting. The community is able to collect so much stuff from all over the place. And they're always so excited to find this stuff and to see it in the game that they're playing. And it's interesting as well, even just when we were doing the Brothers in Arms, some of the reveals there, how quick sometimes, we would do these Discord reveals where we kind of blur something out and over time show slightly more, and people were often so quick to find the original artwork and post it and say, oh, here is where this is from. So it's really amazing how dedicated our community is to that, and many people like Bubbles have all these little collections.
So and that's actually a really interesting point I hadn't thought of, but doing reveals where it's not necessarily new artwork, it's somewhere else that somebody may be familiar with, especially some of those, history junkies who are very familiar with a lot of the artwork. So I guess my question around that, Gummi, is, you mentioned having some commissions done, having a lot of, source material. What's kind of the percentage? How much of the artwork is actually commissioned to be done versus how much of it is taken from, posters and model kits and everything else?
I don't have the exact number. I haven't, counted recently, but at some point when I browsed through it and counted a bit, I think it was maybe 25 to 30%, which is commissioned or something we do. And we do that with we have a large network of freelance artists and some design studios and art studios that we've been working with.
So what makes you decide, hey, we should commission something? Is it that you created the card historically, the card's ability, whatever it is, works really well with what it represents, and hey, we just don't have the proper artwork for it? What makes you decide, hey, we should go get this done?
Yeah, usually we start by trying to find what we need, and sometimes we find, and of course, when we are digging for the artwork so specific things, we are finding a lot of stuff on the way, and I'm constantly, treasure hunting on the internet and finding stuff that we can use sometime in the future as well. So sometimes it is the artwork that dictates what cards we decide to include in an expansion. But of course, often the expansions also have some theme that we need to work with, and we need to have, an even amount of the nations represented, and we want to have, always some tanks and some aircraft, and so it's not only the artwork that dictates, but sometimes it's a kind of a mixture, and usually we try to find something to license if possible, but it varies how difficult that is. Also for the different nations. For example, it's much harder to find artwork depicting the Japanese forces than any of the other nations. Some of them, the ally nations, are a little bit more difficult than the others. It's like I mentioned earlier, aviation art is a very big thing, so it's quite easy to find super quality artwork of aircraft, while it's much harder to find a lot of let's say artwork depicting artillery or just infantry. So that is also a major factor. We have to, for example, commission constantly Japanese infantry because we've used everything we've found, while this is not a problem for USA or Britain.
So you mentioned, having to go both ways, right? Where you find some great artwork and say, hey, we need to make this into a card. The artwork is amazing. And then you have the other way where, yeah, great. We have a lot of wonderful U.S. infantry artwork, but we need some artillery or whatever the case may be. Can you think of any specific artwork that you found and you said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. We need to make a card based on this unit, this aircraft, this whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I could name a lot of examples. I mean, in the for example, from the aviation artists, there is a great master, Robert Taylor, who did a lot of artwork for like illustrated books about World War II, things like that. And those are just of such super quality that it's really exciting to use those. I mean, they're on the first Spitfire cards, the BF 109 and things like that, and a lot of cards, and definitely like these model kit box art. I really wanted to use those, and then there are also different sources. Like one real treasure I stumbled upon was covers of comics published in the UK. I think from 50s or 60s up into the 80s, and the covers of the War Picture Library comics were really cool illustrations and have a completely different style from the rest of the stuff. A bit comic, very dramatic, not always really super realistic. Like you can have like this image of a fighter aircraft, fighting against a tank and things like that, or people jumping out of airplanes and things like that, which is really a cool flavor to add. And then there are some historical archives which have we've used quite a lot of artwork from covers of Italian illustrated newspaper, which there are some examples of there. Completely different style from everything else.
That's kind of the beauty you have of being able to work with artwork, right? Is that you can get some of the more dramatic shots, you can get some of the more, realistic images, and you can play around with that a little bit to kind of fit whatever you're trying to put together. And as much as I'm sure you're, hitting some blockers in certain types of artwork because you do need things that are very specific, there is just so much content that has been produced over the years, like you mentioned, the 60s, 70s even. So much artwork produced around World War II that there is still, I imagine quite a bit to go and dig out if you need.
Absolutely, and I mean we have stockpiled a lot of material that we can use down the line, and of course also our pipeline of with the commissioned artwork is always getting better, and we are getting closer to this vintage style that we are trying to keep.
And the one other piece I want to bring up is specifically the loading screens, because the loading screen images are absolutely beautiful. Like with Brothers in Arms, there's a whole new group of them sort of released out there, and I think they look phenomenal. Are those also kind of drummed up the same ways, where you're finding a mix of commissions and finding other pieces of artwork? Because, like I said, in my opinion, those kind of stand above the rest.
Oh, those are all licensed artwork. And I think the quality of artwork that we have, the best quality is something we have licensed.
Okay.
Because if you take, for example, if we do a commission, I mean, we have a brief, and then an artist a freelancer has X amount of time, maybe a few days to work on a piece for us, and it can't take too long, then it becomes way too expensive and so on. But if you, for example, think about the artwork for the box art or for the model kits, or a cover of a comic magazine, often these artists had were extreme professionals, and they had maybe weeks or even months to do this artwork in huge sizes. I once saw a photograph of one of these one of the artists working on one of these box art, and the box is just small like this, but the actual artwork was like humongous, So yeah, the best quality is usually the licensed stuff, with full respect to the artists we work with.
Oh, and it makes perfect sense, right? To commission something that fits on a card versus something that's going to take up the entire screen is just, it's two different ball games. It's different scope, it's different cost. There's so much that plays into it. So it's no surprise that, going and finding something that already exists is going to get you just an incredible quality. And speaking of that quality again, Elin, to go back to the community, that must be something that you do hear about when it comes to just the imagery, the aesthetics, the quality, the art of the game, especially when a new expansion comes out, and you get this influx of new cards and new images.
100%. This is one of the big things that's, I would say, one of the kind of key pillars of cards. One of the big things that people talk about when they're coming into the game, something that really both drives people to try it, keeps people playing, and keeps people really engaged, is the artwork, the quality of the artwork, and obviously the it's so genuine, it's so real. Both the stuff that we kind of source from the public domain and also the artwork that artists make that is commissioned. Those artists are so connected to and are so good at creating that exact feeling, and that is so much of what makes the mood of the game so genuine.
Yeah, and very different from all our card game competitors, for example.
Absolutely. Cards is one of those few games that's really rooted in reality. And I even remember the World Championships last year talking about designing a set and things like that. Like everything can be very tangible and very real. You don't need a bunch of LCD screens with, again, wizards and lighting effects and all that kind of stuff. You can have something very, very real, which adds a certain grittiness, I guess, to the game that you don't get in a lot of other games that are built in fantasy worlds and things like that. So Elin, I know I've been monopolizing the conversation a little bit. Is there anything you wanted to add? Any questions you wanted to ask? I want to make sure you get your 2 cents in as well.
Yeah. So one thing that I really wanted to kind of ask him a little bit about. So right now we're seeing, so much development on the AI side when it comes to making all kinds of art. And you mentioned that there are difficulties with finding certain artwork more than others. And I'm wondering, is there any potential role for AI art in the future of cards? For example, in upscaling very low resolution images, and maybe if we have very kind of something small and we want to fill in the rest of the field, is there some type of role that you could see AI playing for cards down the line?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic and a very hot topic these days in our industry. We've definitely been, of course, following what's going on and testing and playing around with it, our in-house artists and designers. It's definitely not something I see as a tool for us to create, art from scratch, both just for kind of philosophical reasons, but also because at least if you think about it in the context of AI generating like artwork of aircraft or tanks or even soldiers, there are all these little details there which are so exact. So because this is based in our game is based in reality, it's really hard for the AI, at least as it is still, to grasp all those little details. But what you mention as in practical application of for example, enhancing images that are low resolution, like sometimes we are getting finding something online that we just can't find in good enough quality, but is really good artwork still that we want to use. And that is something we've been experimenting a little bit with and have even used already in a couple of cases. I'm very excited about that, and maybe doing things like adding some stuff to backgrounds or landscape and things like that. I think those are definitely interesting ways of utilizing this new technology.
Absolutely. And I have one more question, which I believe might be a burning question from the community once this podcast comes out. What are the chances that we will have stick figure alternative art in the future of cards?
I would say maybe slim, but maybe they will. It will not be alternative art, but they might even pop up when you least expect them somewhere.
Little Easter eggs.
Yeah.
I like that.
But if there is demand, for the green post-it notes with stick figures, yeah, I mean, we could, but they would be super expensive. The production cost for that is incredible.
Super, super rare. Yes, I like that. It's been incredible going through this whole history. I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that could be phenomenal, whether it's randomly popping up for an April Fool's Day type of thing, or for an anniversary edition, an anniversary set, like 5-year, 10-year, whatever it may be, of all the stick figures, the OG stick figures. I think that could be fantastic. So sorry, Elin. I had to throw that in.
No, absolutely, 100%. No, I was just gonna say, I think it's like so phenomenal to be able to have Gummi here to talk us through like the history of the development and to be able to see, the very original. It's so amazing that you've kept all this around and that we're able to review this today. Because as we can see, the game has gone through so much development over the years, and I would be very curious as well to know if we could maybe add that all to the screen later on, the kind of where exactly we're in development at the different stages, so we can bring a little bit of at the relevance to the images and exactly where we're at. But yeah, this has been phenomenal.
And Gummi, you mentioned you could talk about this forever, and I know we just kind of scratched the surface of this. Is there anything I missed that you think is important that you want to make sure you bring up or mention as we're covering this topic?
Well, maybe one thing I was planning to mention, which I haven't touched upon yet, is that with what comes with the posters, with the war posters, is that they were very different in style depending on the different nations, and that I think that is a really a fun little thing that comes through in the artwork style for the different nations in the game. So you get this. There is a totally different art vibe to the Soviets, for example, than USA or Japanese and so on. And I think that adds to the kind of flavor.
Well, and I know how much time and effort you've put into maintaining that certain aesthetic when it comes to cards as a whole. But I think to your point, jumping in and saying, hey, I'm playing, Japan as a main nation today, or I'm playing US, that can still feel different, just like the cards themselves and the archetypes can feel different, right? You've got on the Japan side, maybe that more aggro destruction effects and things like that. Whereas on the other side of things, you've got the US, you've got ramping, you've got things of that nature. So not only do they feel different in the way of the cards themselves, but also just how they look and how they feel when you're playing them.
Yeah.
Well, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I love chatting about this stuff. I'm such a card game nerd that I love seeing the Post-it notes and all the other things, the oil and the food and all the stuff that didn't maybe make it into the game, and would love to see a fleshed out board game version of this. I think it'd be really cool. But again, maybe anniversary edition or something. No, just dropping that out there. But I appreciate so much, Gummi, you joining us. Elin, always a pleasure. This has been phenomenal. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to another episode of the Frontline podcast.